So this is a video on muscular dystrophy. Now, muscular dystrophy there isn't a single disease of, of muscular dystrophy. These, but there's about 6, I think, identifiable types that are listed in your textbook here on page 578. They're a large, fairly common group of inherited progressive neuromuscular disorders. They can be all over the map. They can range from fairly mild to fairly severe. The ones that we're going to talk about are the Duchenne's and Becker's ones. And what happens with these kids, because it is a disease of childhood, is that they end up with wasting of muscle tissue, and it's a genetic abnormality. So when we look at Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, it's an X-linked recessive disorder. So what that means is that the mother is a carrier. The mother has got 2 genes, the dystrophin gene. One of them is bad, and one of them is good. So she's fine. She doesn't have the problem because the good gene takes over, and she makes proper dystrophin, and her muscles are normal. All her daughters will be fine, but half of them will be carriers of the bad gene. Fathers can't give to their sons because they give the Y chromosome to their sons. They give the X chromosome to their daughters, but males with an X chromosome with the dystrophin gene on it don't generally live long enough to have children, so they don't pass it on. I guess it's theoretically possible, but it doesn't really happen. So this being X-linked means that mothers give it to sons. And that's a particularly sad thing. I can tell you unequivocally, having spent lots of time at sick kids and knowing families, 15 years ago, we lived at Ronald McDonald House for 3 months and saw a lot of this kind of thing. Got to know these families well. And one of the things that I can tell you is that there's an overwhelming sense of guilt that these mothers have when their sons have muscular dystrophy, because they're the only ones responsible. It's a genetic thing that only passes from mothers to sons. And it can be quite devastating. The other types are not gender specific, but but again, they're not as common. So we're actually not going to talk about them. So I'm going to apologize. The slide that got posted was the unedited one, and it actually reflects an older theory of what muscular dystrophy is. The dystrophin protein was first discovered in the late 1980s, and they didn't really quite know what it did. It looked for a while like it had something to do with metabolism within the muscle, but now they've come to realize that it actually is an adhesion molecule. It's a protein that attaches the end of the myofibril to the inside of the sarcolemma, and basically is the rope that the myofibrils are playing tug of war with. That to shorten the whole muscle fiber, the myofibril pulls on the sarcolemma through this adhesion molecule, the dystrophin. Um, and this Duchenne's, and for that matter, Becker's muscular dystrophy, what happens is that uh, they take the kids make inappropriate dystrophin. The dystrophin is not as strong as it should be. There's something wrong with its sequence of amino acids, and so what happens is the as the child uses the muscle, myofibrils detach from the sarcolemma and become useless. They have to be reabsorbed and then replaced. The myofibrils that stay attached end up doing a little bit more work and then are more likely to detach themselves. And when finally there are no myofibrils left attached in that particular muscle fiber, then the muscle fiber doesn't die, but the muscle fiber becomes useless. And it ends up filling up with fat because it becomes non-contractile. And so this becomes a major problem. So the dystrophin isn't produced. In Becker's, some is. But in Duchenne's, virtually none. There's no good dystrophin. There's a couple of other different types. I'm not so worried about that you even read about them. The Duchenne's is the big one that you should pay attention to. So what happens here? When the baby is a baby, there's really nothing is seen. Everything looks fine, unless there's a family history and they do some screening, then it's almost impossible to know. What starts to happen is that when the child starts learning to walk, that's when signs start to show up, and they get this progressive weakness in the muscles that they're using. So the postural muscles and the muscles that are being used a lot are the ones that start to fail. And as muscles start to fail within the muscles, fibers start to fail within that muscle group, the muscles get weaker and weaker and weaker, and other motor units are called on, and so these children start to walk with a very funny gait. They have trouble standing up, and they get up from a sitting position or a kneeling position in a very strange way, and it's called Gower's sign. And I will post a video. There's a bunch of good videos on YouTube showing Gower's sign, and I will post a video on that. And I'll post another video showing the progression of this disease. So what'll happen is then they end up in a wheelchair, and when they end up in the wheelchair, they start to use their arms way more, and then when they use their arms, then their arms start to fail, and then respiratory muscles start to fail, and eventually they die fairly young, very young actually. With our genetic testing and with now that they've identified dystrophin in the last basically 25 years, the diagnosis is much easier. They look for there are various blood tests, they do muscle biopsies, and they start to look at it. Now, one of the problems is that although there's atrophy in the muscle and the muscle starts wasting away, um, these muscle cells start to fill up with fat, and you get something that's called pseudohypertrophy. The the muscles start looking big, but they're non-contractile. So it's not like they end up with pencil-thin legs. They end up with actually very prominent calves and things, but it's a pseudohypertrophy. It's not a real hypertrophy. So what can be done? They if there's contractures in the muscles, if the muscles are congenitally short, then there's surgery to release that. They give these people steroids. They try and minimize how much those muscles get used, that kind of thing, to try and delay this inevitable progress. And that's what's really so sad about it, is that the diagnosis is usually made as toddlers at age 1 or 2, and these kids take 10 years, 12 years to die from this disease, all the while slowly deteriorating with and usually under the mother's care, and the mother is genetically responsible for this disease. A good friend of mine has lost 2 of her brothers to this, and one of the things that she's told me is that it was very, very hard on the family because this progression was so slow, and so it was her 2 younger brothers, and they were born not very far apart from one another. So the second one was born before the first one was even diagnosed, and so they both ended up with this horrible slow diagnosis. You can help with these people, but only just in some sort of a pain management sort of method.